Welcome back to The Last Trade. This week, we're excited to bring you a special edition of the show. The following roundtable discussion was recorded on December 2nd in Nashville, Tennessee, during an Onramp Private Client event co-hosted by Google Fiber at the Gibson Garage event space. Moderated by Onramp's Brian Cubellis, the panel features Michael Tanguma, CEO and co-founder of Onramp and partner at Early Riders, Emily Trapani, head of sales at Google Fiber, and Cam Doody, founder of Brickyard Venture based in Chattanooga. The conversation explores the intersection of technology, investment, and the evolving landscape of Bitcoin with a focus on Nashville as a burgeoning hub for innovation. Panelists discuss their experiences in the tech industry, the importance of information asymmetries in driving value creation, and the implications of Bitcoin as a digital protocol for value. The discussion also highlights the cultural and economic factors that position Nashville and Chattanooga as key players in the tech ecosystem, while examining the challenges of traditional venture capital and the objective properties that make Bitcoin a superior form of money. And now, time for the show.
What you're telling me is that music is about to stop, and we're going to be left holding the biggest bag of odorous excrement ever assembled in the history of capitalism.
1974, 1987, 92, 97, 2000, and whatever we want to call this. It's all just the same thing over and over. We can't help ourselves.
I say when we sell. Hey, I say when we sell.
And it's my great pleasure to moderate today's discussion featuring esteemed panelists across the technological landscape, each with their own unique disciplines and ties to the great city of Nashville. So without further ado, let's begin with some brief intros. We can just go down the line here. Please introduce yourselves to the folks and speak a bit about what you're focused on at your respective firms.
Awesome. So Michael Tanguma, CEO of Onramp and partner also in Early Riders. Really excited to have you guys here. We were walking over from our office. I was thinking about how do we get in the frame of mind. We've been talking about Bitcoin for so long, thinking about like how do we make this exciting and engaging. And I went back to I wasn't early by any means to the space, but early enough in 2018 in New York, I went to one of the first events like this, and I was super excited. I left work, and there was 4 people in that room. There was 3 panelists like this, or something like this, but only 4 people in the room. And the price of Bitcoin at the time was like $3,500. And at the time, like I felt like I wanted to pinch myself, like, oh my God, I know about this. The world doesn't know. And I promise you today, risk adjusted, whether somebody's building, allocating to the asset or companies in the space, it is a much better time. There's been no shortage of regulation, risk, and everything that we'll talk about today. So really pumped to have this conversation.
I'm Emily Trapani. I'm the head of sales at Google Fiber. And I've been in Nashville a little over 10 years at Google Fiber. It'll be 10 years this year. Our 10-year anniversary of announcing that we are building in Nashville is coming up in February. So really exciting time for us. It feels like a nostalgic moment a little bit, but also to have seen all of this happen in the last 10 years. Tanguma was on the team with me when we first started. We were both the sales team. But excited to talk today about Nashville being a place that you can build, where you can raise funds, raise your family. I had 4 kids in that time, in that 10-year period also here in town. So I think my perspective today will be about Google Fiber and us building and growing, but also when we started our business, it was really anchored here. This is one of the first cities that we built. So continuing to expand and grow from here and what we've learned in Nashville, I think is really exciting.
My name is Cam Doody, and I guess I'm now a venture capitalist. I started my career building a company called Bellhops. We started back in 2012, just, in the moving and relocation space. And then we sold part of our company right before COVID. And my co-founder and I just had seen part of venture capital that we really didn't like, something we thought was really missing. We thought we were going to start another company. We ended up starting a venture firm called Brickyard. And so we invest in early stage companies and technology and, pre-seed and seed is really where we focus. But my personal affliction is just wholly with Bitcoin, which is really funny because venture capital and Bitcoin are almost diametrically opposed things, and go through life not feeling kind of feeling unsettled. But hopefully we can kind of get into some of the reason why there. But I think that what we'll talk about tonight, hopefully we can shed some light on how Bitcoin is going to start to permeate through capital allocators and how that is really going to change, actually change the world, and not in a, from a perspective of how everybody talks about, we invest in world-changing companies. You can't change, you can't back or fund enough world-changing companies if we maintain a positive inflation rate. And so Bitcoin's the key to all of that. So hopefully we can get into that tonight.
Yep, very well said. Thank you guys for that. So maybe to start, the sort of core underlying thematic between all three of you is working in the technology space, emerging technology. So when people talk about emerging or disruptive technology, in my mind, really what they're talking about is some form of information asymmetry. So if we think about technological adoption curves, it's really the innovators and the early movers to those new forms of technology that actually accrue the most value by building out key infrastructure and also backing founders that allow those new technologies to flourish. So this ability to really see around corners and see how new technologies will impact and influence society, culture, and the economy is really what drives value creation and ultimately asymmetric returns over time. So this question is really for all of you. Maybe Cam, we'll start with you. Can you just share some perspectives on how your firm navigates and capitalizes on information asymmetries to really drive innovation and value creation?
Well, I'd say Brickyard's pretty, we're investing so early. 70% of our investments are pre-seed investments, which is really the earliest that you can possibly invest in a company. And normally a company is, before we'll consider investment, we've backed a few pre-revenue companies, but normally the companies that we back are like post-revenue in some small way, like 5 or 7K in monthly revenue kind of thing, where they have customers and they're now, in the process executing towards product market fit. But we know that we're not category investors. We're curious about pretty much everything. We aren't evaluating business models, so to speak. Like when you're investing this early in companies, we know that almost 100% of our companies are going to be wildly tweaked and adjusted over the next 12 to 18 months post-investment. And so what we really look for is that sort of intrinsic drive that that real founders have. Like our take in Brickyard is the ZERP era really broke a lot of the space in that there was too much money, not enough deals. So venture had to market itself as this sexy pop culture thing with Forbes 30 under 30 and celebrity investors. And you guys have heard, I've said this trope so much, but it's like the space had to attract founders in, which the beginning of venture capital was the opposite of that. Venture capital was just a financing option, the only option that you had for a company that didn't cash flow. And so founders have changed a lot, and you have a lot of probably 80 or 90% of founders that are in the space today are in it for the wrong reasons. And so we created, Brickyard is this thing where if we get to a term sheet with you as a company, you have to move to the middle of nowhere, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Georgia Tech, and put your head down for 18 to 24 months and just put the blinders on. And founders that are chasing the status or the acclaim or all the other kind of tangential reasons for why you would get into venture capital that, a lot of that happens kind of everywhere in some of the larger tech hubs. You're not going to move to Chattanooga and put your head down for 18 months if you're in that category. So our edge is how do you find the founders that are ready to go to battle in the trenches for a decade? Because that's really what, venture is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Michael, how about for you? Obviously, Bitcoin, there's certain information asymmetries just with the asset itself.
but also with the business that we're building in terms of, financial services on a Bitcoin standard. What does that look like? What are the information asymmetries that you're focused on?
Yeah, I think so. A couple of things going back to Cam and Emily's point in the question. This reminds me of like when I was cutting my teeth outside of school. I worked randomly, and it all ties back to this, at a high-end auction house, and had to learn about like value of like most things. And the reality is, the value of most things, there is no value. Like you find old boxes of stuff, you bring it in, and the thing we would say is the definition of value is you don't have, or definition of scarcity is like you don't have it, right? Because it's like it'd be very rare somebody would come in with a coin, jewelry that didn't need to be melted, things like that. And so when I think about what we discuss here in the definition of value, and especially specifically value investing, is it's not widely known, because if it was widely known, there wouldn't be value there. So today we're sitting at, whether it's, and so this ties back into this conversation, everyone here has had some vision of a future that probably was most likely right in their own professional experience. With Cam, it may not fully share what he does, but like to signal what he's doing special today is because of zero interest rates and the cost of capital being relatively low, if not zero, for a very long time. What was a cottage industry and required experts turned into just manifested as like effectively a beast that nobody recognizes, and it's money chasing anything that under the sun. Cam had the asymmetry of building Brickyard with blood, sweat, and tears, and recognized, well, wait, there's actually value to understand not only the pain an entrepreneur goes through, but then ultimately, what's the heuristic to know if they're real or not? It was setting them up with having them come out to Chattanooga. Chattanooga, in my mind, and maybe this isn't doing it justice, but it could have been like any random place in the United States. It was showing that a founder was serious about building. And then so for Emily, I don't know a full story, but to tie this back to going together, is that we worked together at Google about 10 years ago. And there was a vision of Emily leading her career at a well-known company, Sprint, I believe, and effectively building out infrastructure in, at the time, second and third tier cities, which again goes back to being right about things, because now this is not a second or third tier city. I would make the case that this is a first tier city, because people have woken up from the asymmetries that most markets globally still haven't recognized, is that like people don't need to sit in front of a computer at a desk in an office space anymore. They can work anywhere. And those who understand that best will benefit from a municipal perspective. So all these things tie into effectively what we'll talk about today with Bitcoin. It's the same setup. Individuals with background, having time, looking at the space, understanding whether the thing that's hard about Bitcoin, and we'll tie it into Google and infrastructure and technology, is Bitcoin has two different properties. It's a technology, so there's a bunch of things being built similar to like fiber building out into a network and the things that will be built on a city, but then it also has monetary value. And so it has this weird hybrid of almost like there's a lot of real estate investors in here that's like getting a piece of real estate super early because the underlying is valuable, but then everything that goes up and everything around it becomes really valuable. And that's really, it's an interesting paradox. And during the Q&A come into it, is like real estate investors historically, in my experience, I've been doing this for kind of well now for my age, about half a decade, talking to people about it professionally, is real estate investors are generally the last. And it's scary to me because when we look at global real estate, when it comes to commercial, and I was at WeWork, by the way, so I was lighting money on fire when I was learning about one month with Adam Newman. Like I was sitting.
We've seen the documentary.
Exactly. Yeah. So to round that out is like, it's like a door that's just like closing on individuals, and people are waking up. The thing that there's two tropes that have come to mind about real estate. One is Bitcoin doesn't call you at 2 a.m. to complain about the leaky pipe. Jeff, who's in the room, who I lease a place here in Nashville, I won't call him at 2 a.m., but if there's a leaky pipe, he's going to get a call. And then the other thing that's...
It has to be less than $500.
It has to be less than $500. I should have thought of it. The other thing about real estate is, I have a good friend, his dad was in real estate, and said, the thing about real estate is, even though it's not very liquid, it's always there. And he deeply understands Bitcoin. He said, well, the thing about Bitcoin is, even though it's not really there, it's highly liquid, right? And most people looked at real estate, and then COVID happened in 2020, and individuals recognized, well, wait, I should have underwritten risk in a different way when it comes to, city hubs and the flea and the tunnel and all the things we know about it.
And Emily, how about for you, just in terms of sort of what you alluded to earlier around Google being very early mover to Nashville and sort of, seeing what could become of a city like this.
Yeah.
What kind of information asymmetries have you honed in on in the past decade?
Be information asymmetry, whether it be symmetrical speeds, everybody get their information as quickly as possible. Obviously, we're talking about like getting information as fast as you can. There's a currency to that. So I think that our part in that is enabling that for people, access to information, speed. It's funny you said his company could happen anywhere because it probably couldn't. I think when you think about Chattanooga, the first gig city, like the sensibilities that go into a municipality starting a gig network, there's a sense of culture that has to be shared to even kind of prioritize something like that. So I would think the thinkers and the doers and the dreamers that are in Chattanooga, when that was happening, all kind of share that sensibility. And so for Nashville, I think something that makes it so special, and this is, 10 years later, is you have a culture in a city where you've got like the top 3 healthcare companies globally, right? So you got like a lot of smart people here, right? Well, 15 universities, I think. People who graduate from school here, stay here, build their families here, build their businesses here. But then you've also got Music Row and people just that are like, I'm going to come here and like play the guitar in the corner and become the next Chris Stapleton. So you've got crazy people, very talented people who are like a little bit crazy, right? So our culture is like very smart, highly intelligent, then very creative, but then also a little crazy. And I think that is the recipe for a successful entrepreneur, a startup, any business, but also I think that's probably the Bitcoin recipe.
Yeah.
Right.
Very well said. And a great transition to my next question, which is more specifically around Nashville as an innovative hub. So if we think about, the early days of the internet, call it sort of 90s and early 2000s, local communities were very critical in cultivating innovation hubs. So really the hub of the internet was effectively Silicon Valley. And if we fast forward to today, I think you could make the argument that the technological nexus of the United States, at least, has really shifted and become almost more decentralized. So you're seeing founders and startups, relocate to places like Austin, Denver, and of course, Nashville. So question for everyone, why is Nashville, and by extension, Chattanooga, very well positioned to be one of these modern hubs of tech innovation, and what has drawn your respective firms to focus on this region?
So as a native Texan, it kind of pains me to say this, but Nashville is probably the best city in America, in my opinion. From what you just referenced, from innovation to culture to the conservative ideals, like what Emily's referencing goes back to like the founding of America. We kind of forget. I was thinking a lot about this, independent of who anybody was citing for in the election, of like America, why it's so innovative. We do a lot of business in the Middle East, and there's this natural friction because we're progressive here, which they're naturally conservative, but they also really like the innovation that comes from the progressive nature. So they're always trying to court people out there. And the reality is America's the best run startup that's ever existed. When you think about it from just all the things you said, everything you described about Nashville is what America was founded on. Like you have to have entrepreneurial endeavors, you have to get on a ship, all the things associated. And we kind of like lost that a little bit when you think about incumbents in all the large sectors of the world naturally get stifled with bureaucracy and all the things that everybody probably knows about. And so there's this resurgence with technology, and one of them is an open, decentralized internet. And that allows for the dissemination of information, companies to be built, all the things associated, but you need the infrastructure in place. And so Nashville having that, or Google having the vision to go to these markets, and Nashville just emerging. I kind of joke that everyone's afraid to go down to Texas. They ended up in Nashville. But there's just like some truth, and I ended up here. And so anyway, it's a fantastic place, and I think that's where Nashville embodies a lot of those spirits of like the conservative nature, but also the ethos of entrepreneurship, that a lot in the friendliness of it. Because when I was in New York City, I moved back to Texas at the time because I saw a lot of the bureaucracy in building, and it was like, well, if you want to run a business, you're trying to give yourself the best chance to succeed, and you go to places that allow for that.
Yeah. There's some there's a lot of like e-commerce that's based in Nashville. I think you can get to like 50% of the U.S. population within 6 hours of Nashville. So there's a lot of like kind of logistics from here. But there's also this connectiveness, not just like you're, not too far from your mom. You can like drive home and see her or whatever for holidays. But there's also just like this connectivity, I think, in our culture and our community. And some of that, for the same reasons we were talking about, like you're really intelligent, you're really creative, you're a little crazy. But there's also this like cooperation, not competition. And when you look at healthcare, like any successful surgery, everyone's working together in pursuit of a goal. You kind of have to put your ego aside, even like surgeons, right? To like dial in on this collaboration that's happening. In the music industry, it's the same thing. And you would think it'd be more cutthroat and competitive, but it's actually everyone is working together. Look at any recent top song, a TikTok song. There's like 10 co-writes. There's a lot of people in the same room, like working on the same thing. So our culture in Nashville comes from that. Even the sports team here, everything is very much how can we work together, to the point that if you're not like that, it's weird. It's like if you see Reba when you're out at dinner and you ask her for an autograph, like that's weird. You would know like you're not from Nashville. And if someone's like, hey, like you on LinkedIn, hey, my recent job, let's get lunch and chat about it. Like if you say no to something like that, that's weird. Like it's good that we have a culture where like when you're not behaving in the right way, like that stands out more so than like it's kind of expected that everybody would cooperate. So building a business here, whatever it is, you have the assumption that people are going to show up and be helpful and be collaborative and cooperate versus compete. So I think that's something that's very special. Also fosters any kind of like startup or new company, but then also when you're trying to scale, you have to be able to do that as well.
This was Emily's nice way of saying she's not really sure about Bitcoin, but she's down to collaborate.
Right, yeah. I was like, I don't want to, what is it when you go in those like timeshare things? We're having lunch. She's like telling me this presentation. I'm like, are you going to sell me some knives? What is it?
She thought I was a used Bitcoin salesman. That's
It's a lot. You haven't sold me yet. No.
Kim, how about you? Any Chattanooga specific thoughts?
I think about cities like I think about startups. So like Nashville is great. It's awesome. But it's kind of like a pre-IPO thing, like your best days are kind of behind you, like I am like a heroin addict of the early days. Like I'm the early.
Where are you going with this?
So I like the acceleration, like, building bellhops, for example, going from 0 to 200 employees was super exhilarating. Going from like 200 to 500 sucked. Like wasn't fun. And I think, what I'm drawn to, I'm gonna shell out for Chattanooga because I think it's the greatest place in the world, but it's not Nashville. It'll never be Nashville. We're like a seed stage city, where like every day, when we get a new great restaurant to town, like that's awesome. It's like we feel that. That actually moves the needle for us. And so building a city like Chattanooga for us, being able to do what we do with Brickyard we've kind of figured out how to stay in a city like Chattanooga and also do what we do. It's conducive to early stage company builders to be in a place where you don't have a lot of distraction. And that's like a lot of value that we provide at Brickyard. It's like we're pulling, teams out of SF, out of New York, out of Boston, Austin, London, etc., putting them in this like mid-sized city that's totally relevant to technology. But like in that trough of sorrow in the early days, none of that stuff matters. It's like talking to customers and shipping code. And, 1 week to the next, you can like really move the needle. And I kind of feel the same way about Chattanooga is we're still small enough to where year to year, you can kind of look back and see, you can feel the acceleration of the city. And that's what I love about it.
You're building this multi-million-dollar asset. You should put Google Fiber in it. And our job 10 years ago was to explain why, and this is a brand new company that everyone was just hearing about for the first time. Why should this developer put our infrastructure in, which was kind of a pain at the time because you're like under construction. We don't want to get in the way, or you just built this beautiful asset and we're like, yeah, we're going to do some construction after they just painted. So we were trying to find ways for them to say yes to this. And one of them was like, we'll help with your lease up. We'll do free moving. We hired them. Do you remember that?
I don't remember.
We put Google Fiber shirts on your bellhop guys.
We did Uber movers.
Yes.
This is in the same like.
I did a deal with Uber a couple years ago. Same idea. But I was also laughing because your whole thing is like, let's get these founders not distracted, put them in a room for 18 months, like have them focus. And like my preferred leadership style is like, no walls, no focus, the more the merrier. Everybody overhearing everybody's other conversation because so much sparks when you like slam into each other. And that I think is very much it's a Google thing, but it's also a Nashville thing. Everyone here, probably this whole audience, there's like a slash. Like when my husband we moved here 10 years ago, 11 years ago almost. He was just in medical school, just graduated his first year outside of medical school, and then got a record deal. So his backup plan was to be a doctor, which, by the way, is not the worst backup plan in Nashville. But the idea is like you move here, you're pursuing this music career, but you have something else. You're maybe doing something else at the same time. This year was the first year that he stopped working in a hospital and we have a music studio now full time. And it took 10 years to kind of get plus there's kids, we have children. So like get everything in order to like make that leap. But here, everybody has like a slash in their bio. You're like a finance person, but slash, you're singing karaoke on Friday, trying to get your record deal or whatever it is. Or you're doing a podcast while also working your 9 to 5, or you've got like your 5 to 9, your 9 to 5, and then your 5 to 9. So I like that about Nashville because there's like this, maybe that's part of what drives people to be helping each other, but not kind of catering to like the focus and rather having that distraction. There's like magic that kind of comes from those different parts of people kind of bumping into each other, I think.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Change your business model.
Well, to be fair to Cam, I think part of his format, what he's built, is exactly to spark what you're referencing, is because all of his teams that he funds are in the same room effectively. And so they are bouncing ideas off of each other. And so you do get that collaborative.
And if I go back to the apples and oranges, because like what you're describing is like conducive, there's a part of Nashville, there's a part of like remote work. Like there was a study that just recently came out. I was like, now it's like 33% of people have 2 jobs that work remote, right? Because it's just like a function of the side. But where Cam's coming from, and then both sides make sense. It's like, if you are in the fight for your life, like that's what effectively it is when you're starting a business, and especially when you're taking on external capital, because now you're fighting for other people's lives too, right?
Yeah.
You're investing. Like you don't want any of what you're describing. You want them literally, like he references it, burn the ships, and I love it. It's because like you're just like saying like, I'm taking my stand. I'm going to try to make my impact in the world, and it's the only thing that can.
Yeah. Well, you don't want a backup plan, right? You eliminate the option for a plan B.
Like extraordinary or different. It's like they know that there's sacrifices that can be made, and so there's just a natural balance. And then post that, they don't, like maybe some people stay in Chattanooga, but others go to these cities and go get to indulge and they become successful. But there's always that sacrifice in it. That's why I look back at like what Cam's doing is special, because as special as Chattanooga is, it's still for most people just a random place in the middle of Tennessee.
Well, I mean, most of our teams are not going to stay in Chattanooga, and they shouldn't. I hope a lot of our teams come to Nashville, because Nashville has the talent density. It has it's a city that you can recruit to really well.
Right.
And I think that's going to happen. We've already had a couple teams open offices in Chattanooga and are looking to open offices. Usually it's like has to do with customer service or product. But Nashville is I'm hoping we can funnel a ton of teams here.
There's a couple of real estate investors in here. They were talking about, some of this like stuff that's been used about infusing, a loan on real estate with some Bitcoin, and maybe Cam as that picks up, we'll Onramp's going to need
Thanks for collab.
And then we'll get some 8 gig Google Fiber and we'll happily ever after.
You mentioned like people working from home. I thought it was like during the pandemic, everybody kind of had to work from home, or they, it shifted how people work. And so if given the chance to work anywhere, a lot of people chose Nashville. There was a ton of Googlers. Like we had like a listserv of how many people chose to move to Nashville. And it was shocking where when given the choice and nothing else, this is where people chose to be. So now with the return back to office, and a lot of companies are mandating it or going to a hybrid schedule, it used to be that you would recruit companies to move to Nashville. You'd go to the C-suite and like get them to kind of invest here, create headquarters here. Now it's kind of like this opposite is happening where people who chose to move here don't want to move back to wherever. So now those companies are like, oh, the talent is there. They already live there. Now we're going to build a second office there or a satellite office. So it's kind of being led by the will of the employer, the choice of the employee, which I think is fascinating. I haven't heard of that happening in any other cities, probably not many besides Nashville.
I mean, I think this ties into the theme we're talking about is like the market's changed and the market gets to decide what the incumbents will do, and some larger will be able to hold off longer. But to your point, I mean, which to be fair, like this happens in Austin and Atlanta and others, just they're different scale.
People moved here from Austin during Nashville or during the pandemic.
I mean, I'm Texas.
You did.
I mean, I still live there, but
Let's talk about this.
so well, what I did want to share is that people. Well, this will tie into Bitcoin. So people leave the cities because they can work anywhere. They're not going to come back, and other talent will take them. In the same way, people have problem with capital flight. So you see this whether it's more prevalent on a nation state perspective. In the UAE has been big for this, where they'll welcome from a tax perspective Singapore, where the countries start to operate companies, and they have to create the most advantageous environment for the quote employee. It's not like somebody you just tax and you have to. And this is what we're still seeing, legacy quote states or cities like a San Francisco, New York, not get. And that's why you have this fleeing of capital. The point being is it used to be very hard to move your money because you had real estate and you had all this physical infrastructure, you had all these different assets that you have to move. And going to the Bitcoin angle, there's no shortage of value props, but one of them is that point about it's not always there. It's not tangible, but it's highly liquid and it's easily movable. And so it goes to what Emily's describing is as the market wakes up, they just realize they have to compete for talent from not only a job real estate perspective, but then also how do you actually treat from taxes and all the other things that you would want in a place to live, or the money will just leave because you don't have the legacy ways of, you're going to just sell all this. I mean, obviously family, there's some still things that hold us down, but it's changing drastically and most places don't really grok that yet.
I think that's very well said. And I'm going to pull us back. I'm going to pull us back to the thread of the internet analogy, with respect to Bitcoin. So, similar to the internet, which emerged via a set of open protocols, Bitcoin is very simply just an open protocol for value. So if the internet, if you look at the internet as the digitization of information, Bitcoin really represents the digitization of value. And the key difference here is that, between the early 90s and now is that owning a piece of the underlying infrastructure is actually possible with Bitcoin. So, owning Bitcoin today, buying Bitcoin today is as if you were able to purchase a piece of the internet back then. So, Michael, maybe we can start with you, but can you speak to, at a high level, the innovation that is Bitcoin and specifically why now more than ever it's important to understand what's happening and really why Bitcoin is currently having, sort of its mainstream moment with, the likes of various corporations and also now nation states considering adopting Bitcoin as a reserve asset?
Yeah, so it's mainstream for us. It's so insanely early. We talk to so many people about all this stuff, and it's just you really have to know your audience and be careful how you describe these things. There's two components to this. So the nation state adoption, personal account adoption, there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. And if you can come to that conclusion and why that's credible, well, then you start to underwrite, what's the value of it? So there's the monetary aspect of it, and we can go into that, or we can have separate conversations about that. Our firm helps with the education. There's the other aspect that Brian's referencing is that it's a piece of technology and allows for transfer of value. So there's a lot of folks that will think about gold, or we'll go back to interchange with Amex and credit cards, all those things. In an internet world, when your Tesla's going across tolls or you need to do microtransactions, just cannot be done because the intermediary problem. That's the problem. You have an intermediary that has to facilitate the transaction, and it's not economical to move. This goes back to how browsers were set up. I forget, I'll butcher it, but there's the 402 or whatever the error code is that you naturally get. There's an error code where they were going to put micropayments, but you just couldn't figure it out. The way you figure it out is why I started with there's only 21 million, because if you can derive there's only 21 million and some value will be from it, and then all the value stems from it, now you can actually associate when you're online why you would want more of that. You can't do the other version. You can't create a technology and make people value it. You have to have the underlying properties make sense. And so very often, again, been doing this for a long time, that we get on the defensive, and this is to Emily because she doesn't know yet what's happening. It's very often people will go back, we've done this for years, and they'll go, it's 3,000, 20,000, 60,000, go back to 20, all the numbers, and individuals will come up and say, well, why is it, explain Bitcoin, why is it 100, why is it going to be $1 million, why isn't it 0, and all this. It's look, if you want to have a conversation about value, what gives things value, there's objective things that give things value. When it comes to, we all know why scarcity. That's why we like these guitars behind us and other things like that. And then it needs to be divisible because you need to be able to transfer it up. It needs to be able to teleport across time, right? And space, because if you can't send it to you, then what's the value of it? So we can have that conversation. But the way I like to frame it now, because it's been working for 15 years and it only goes one thing up and to the right, is why isn't it? It's a $2 trillion asset today. Why isn't it a $10 trillion asset? And the reason why it's not a $10 trillion asset is because there hasn't been historically a good way to store it. So everybody here, no matter what they know about Bitcoin, they know two things. Either it ends up in a landfill in like the UK in some like hard drive, or some North Korean takes it and you wake up and all your Bitcoins are gone, right? Like that's what, grandmas know. And so this notion of, well, okay, so somebody has exposure. A couple of people I know in here probably have exposure. Everybody has like some exposure, if not like maybe zero or a little bit. But they're drastically under allocated because of the gravity of what we're talking about, whether it's from there's 450 roughly $1 trillion in assets that are all like what Bitcoin's competing with, and it all competes with them head on and just completely crushes it when you really break it down. And so there's that aspect. But then there's a secondary part on the technology side. And that's the easy part to anchor to, because it's just like when Brian was referencing technology companies adopt it. Every technology company is going to hold Bitcoin. Every business is going to hold Bitcoin. Every individual is going to hold Bitcoin in the same way everybody uses the internet. And at the time, everybody like, are you going to be an internet company? And yeah, the .com bubble and all those things happen. In the same way today, everybody's like, are you a Bitcoin company? Well, it's just, if it's money and it's a form of value that people hold, everyone will just be utilizing it, whether it's part of their technology stack or part of their savings. They're not mutually exclusive, and that ultimately leads it to be intertwined in everything. So yeah,
there's no such thing as an internet company today, right? You're just a company, and obviously you're leveraging the internet.
Except for mine,
which
that's all we do. Google Fiber, internet company, build the internet.
Maybe an exception.
That's all we do.
But the point being, like, there was, companies in the early 2000s that was their whole thing. They just add internet to their name. And we saw this even with Bitcoin and blockchain to some extent in prior cycles, where it's, a company adds blockchain to their name and the stock price jumps. It's like, well, that won't exist in a world where, to Michael's point, Bitcoin is just globally recognized as a form of money. Well, then obviously, if you're a company and you're operating with money, which most companies do, then you're going to be leveraging Bitcoin in some way. Cam, did you have any thoughts along these lines, sort of the internet analogy?
I mean, I'm gonna like block and bridge here. I have a pretty like narrow beat on Bitcoin. It's not what I do for a living. Like, what I do for a living is I'm a capital allocator, but because I'm a capital allocator and I also understand Bitcoin, the thing that I feel like compelled to say, if I tweeted something out recently, I was like, this was when Bitcoin was going from like 60 to 90, and I tweeted something like, if I've spent, if I've spent 5 minutes with you in the last 2 years, like, you are in my iMessage thread right now. People are just texting me constantly, like, holy shit, what's happening? Like, thank you so much for getting me into Bitcoin. Like, for me, the thing that matters most for folks in the crowd that don't fully understand what Bitcoin is you have AI, which is Moore's Law. Just, it's a train that will not stop. There's nothing that can stop this thing. Our productivity is right at the precipice of the J curve, where we're going to get way more productive faster than we've ever been, faster than has ever happened in human history. We're 4% more productive every year in the US. That's about to go to 10. It's about to go to 15. It's about to go to 20% a year, okay, over the next 20, 25 years. Like, we're at the point where stuff is going to be moving so fast, no one can keep up, all right? That's the power production side of the economy. These are like these nuclear power plants that do everything better for less inputs, like more outputs, less inputs. And that's what productivity is. And these companies that are building on top of this modern technology, aka AI, the cost of all things should be dropping, but it's not. Why is it not? Like, how are we in a position here where we're better at everything at an accelerated pace, and yet all our shit costs more every single year? Like, everything should be costing less and less and less. What's happening is the U.S. has $36.5 trillion in debt. Okay? And the Fed has one job, and that job is don't default. Okay? And with technology accelerating its pace of productivity, we're ramming more economic energy into the same number of units. Okay, so if the Fed never printed another dollar, we would default, because paying back that $36.5 trillion would be way harder, because each unit buys more. So if each unit buys more, you have to do more work to pay off each unit. Okay, and so for every gain that we have on the productivity side, the Fed has to offset by printing money just to avoid default. Okay, and how that is manifesting in all of our lives is our eggs that should be getting 4 to 6% cheaper every year are getting 2 to 3% more expensive every year. And so what's actually happening is the Fed is stealing the 4 to 5% production gains that we have earned, plus 3 or 4%. All right, so inflation is not stuff's getting 4% more expensive. It should be getting 5% cheaper, but it's actually 4% more. So what's going to happen over the next decade is AI is about to accelerate the pace of deflation. All right, and the Fed is going to have to print like no tomorrow to offset it, just to avoid default. All right, so we're going to go from 4% to 5% to 7% to 10%. Stuff should be getting 10% cheaper for us every year, but really all they have to do is maintain a 2% inflation rate. But now they're stealing 12%, right? The 10% of gains that we've earned in the economy plus 2% on the other side. And so AI and Bitcoin are two sides of the same coin. You have the power production side that's ramming energy into our money, and then you have our batteries that are storing monetary energy that we produce. And I'll just wrap it all up to say, money always converges on the best money. And so USD is the best fiat money in the world. And what we're about to experience over the next 15 years, people are going to realize there is a better money than the best money on earth. And people are going to start jumping ship, and the entire world is going to be repriced in Bitcoin. And the thing that's going to offset that is you guys are going to be, talking about, does this change the dynamic of the world reserve currency? If we implement a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and if we start actually hedging, the debt that we have, not trying to grow our way out of our debt, but also allocate our capital and our resources into something that's going to hedge the debt that we carry, we will retain the world reserve currency. Bitcoin will bolster the US dollar. We will save in Bitcoin, and we will spend in US dollars. And because more monetary energy is being stored in this pristine asset, the prices of all things are going to fall. The Fed is likely to go away. Like, the world gets repriced in a fixed monetary policy where we all benefit from the gains of the hard work and innovation that we produce every single year. So that's what Bitcoin is. It's the perfect battery. There's no intrinsic value to Bitcoin. Bitcoin without AI would never live up to what it was capable of. AI without Bitcoin would never live up to what it is capable of, in terms of benefiting humanity. So that's my beat.
What do you think about that, Emily?
We haven't changed our price on our 1 gig product in 10 years. That's all I was thinking. Like, eggs are more expensive, everything's more expensive. Our price is the same 10 years ago.
Google is the money printer.
No. I think one of the maybe problem or opportunity you have is that reminds me of 10 years ago is when we were first out trying to tell people you need a gig or you should. It's like, why? What am I going to do with that? And we didn't know. We didn't have the best answer for it. So at the time, we went to the creators, the doers, the people that the crazy people I keep referencing, and we were like, here, we're going to give you this resource. And then you tell us what you do with it. And it was like the most exciting time because we heard from our users what this meant. And there's one story in Nashville that I wouldn't have been able to think up until after it happened, which was we went to Music Row. It was like RCA Studio A, I think is who we sold. And they finally had a gig in a studio. And before that, you're building a song, right? So you do your parts, your stems, whatever it is. Maybe you're playing a track with some guitars, okay? What they would do is record it, download it to an external hard drive, get a courier on a bicycle, come pick this thing up, which, by the way, jostle it around. It's a little risky, okay? So you got like your precious cargo, and they would drive it to the next studio, plug it in, and lay the next track, drums or whatever. And this would happen over a period of weeks, months, whatever, to build a song. It was like a physical thing that you had to move around. Once you have a gig, now all of a sudden, and this was a music producer that told me the story, he's laying a track, recording with another person collaborating with him who is in Paris. And now we're doing this in real time. And this was 10 years ago. So you can imagine this takes somebody who's like a Music Row producer, somebody obviously very successful. And suddenly they are now a global business collaborating internationally and can finish a song quickly, like, in real time. So imagine like having that capability when you go into the pandemic, it gives you like a superpower. So now, we were talking about this recently, we just launched a couple of weeks ago, 8 gig in Nashville. I'm having the same conversations and it feels so nostalgic because I'm like, I don't know what you're going to do with this. And I can't even imagine to dream it up, but I'm going to find the people who are the dreamers who are going to figure it out and then they'll tell me. So we're going to the podcasters and the creatives and Music Row, it's the same people we went to 10 years ago, often the same person, and saying like, hey, we now have this resource, like test it out. You tell us what this means to your business. And I feel like you have a similar opportunity with Bitcoin where you're saying like, there's a million things we can't even imagine what this is going to unlock or the potential that it has, but it's getting it into the hands of the people who are able to think that way in the abstract and they can start to build. And this is probably a lot of the entrepreneurs that you work with, but that's the early phases. It's like finding those people, giving them the resource, and then just kind of waiting for what feels like the magic to kind of happen.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to title. And I didn't know if you were going to be able to do with Cam referencing the dollar going.
To me, I could do it.
I want to break it to early, right? Like so the capital allocation piece. The thing that is really interesting to me about Bitcoin is when you denominate your world in Bitcoin, your capital allocation strategy totally changes because you realize the hurdle is not the S&P, okay, 7% a year. That's not the hurdle rate to beat. The hurdle rate is a 60% 4-year CAGR asset called Bitcoin. And so how you allocate capital, do I hire this person for $100,000 a year? Well, would I rather have this person or would I rather have Bitcoin? Right. And so talk about early riders, like how you're thinking about how companies should be thinking about allocating capital.
At Onramp, we believe that Bitcoin is the most important asset of the 21st century. The hard part is securing it right. There are shortcomings with keeping your coins on an exchange, but also with setting up your own self-custody arrangement. Onramp solves for these concerns. Our multi-institution custody solution maximizes security and minimizes counterparty risk, ensuring that your Bitcoin remains securely in your possession, and provides built-in inheritance planning to ensure your family is protected as well. Onramp provides peace of mind for your Bitcoin journey, whether for your whole stack or for part of it as a complement to your existing self-custody setup. For more information, check us out at onrampbitcoin.com.
Yeah, there's a few threads to tie in. So Cam was referencing the dollar Bitcoin, and Emily was referencing the state of viewers and like that there's so much room, right? A lot of this stuff is open to interpretation. So there's like 2 points. What do you build is open to the smartest people. And then in this room, how do you think about why it matters to you? Everybody's different. It's multidisciplinary. That's why it's so hard. And there's no marketing effort. So everybody comes in at their own kind of conclusion on like, they need it. But what Cam was alluding to and what Emily's alluding to is it's very asymmetric. And we keep using this term, but generally when people think about asymmetric, they only think about the upside. The problem is technology is asymmetric in the truest sense. It's upside and downside risk. So if you adopt it early, you get to benefit the upside. If you don't adopt it at all, you get to experience the downside. On the monetary side, you basically get the lifeblood sucked out of you, as Cam was referencing, from a number of reasons we could talk about. And then from the technology side, to Emily's point, well, if you don't have those rails that you needed, well, then you're just naturally behind the competitor that has it. To go to Cam's point, to make it very like easy, not polarizing, it's like Bitcoin just allows individuals to buy more eggs every week than less, and the dollar lets you buy less. It's a battery to consume the dollars. There's only 20 million. So if you have all these scarce assets that exist and they all go up year over year, Bitcoin is the most scarce asset. So it goes up the fastest. It'll continue. That's the nice version without saying that we're going to lose well. But so now to go to Emily's and to Cam's question about, so when you come to that conclusion, well, then you naturally are like everything you look at to what Cam was referencing. Well, why would I buy the water? Why would I invest in this business if this asset just goes up X year over year? And it's not to say you don't spend your money, because money is meant to be spent. You're just naturally looking at things in a more discerning way. We all grew up, or a lot of people are older, grew up with their parents telling them money doesn't grow on trees. I think we probably all recognize like it doesn't physically grow on trees, but it might as well grow on trees because it just continues to get spun out. Like no matter what you turn on the news, we're printing the next 100 billion, sending it wherever. And so you look at that through a lens of from an entrepreneurial perspective, was what we did at Onramp. You start to realize, wait, I can actually build much more efficiently if I look in a more discerning way of how do I allocate capital? Because you're the ultimate form of capital allocation is running a business, because you like have to move the money or you go out of business if you don't do it correctly. And an easy example to this is like flexible work and contract. In an age of going back to working remotely, a lot of people again are interested to work in this space. There's only so many businesses that'll happily work for a percentage of what they would in a full-time job in kind of quote unquote moonlight, especially high performers, because high performers, that everybody knows, earmuffs, but like at Google, the best performers work 20% of the time. And this is just like, I'm speaking as I was there. It's like, I didn't work that much because like,
speak for yourself.
I'm sorry, I was talking about myself, but I was also, was I okay?
No. They say like hire the person that's gonna try to do more in the less time, or hire not the lazy person, but sometimes they phrase it like hire the diva, like the person that's gonna I'm not doing that, but they have to get it done. So figure the shortcut out, or figure out the way to make it work that's the most efficient. Not lazy.
What we're basically getting at is that like there's a lot of talent arbitrages that the rest of the market doesn't know, and so normally it can. Knows this, and I would hope advises against it. But like when businesses raise capital, especially venture capital, like there's a whole I guess the question, there's misalignment of incentives across the board. So you have misalignment from the person that's giving the dollars, which is the limited partner, because they're looking at everything through the melting ice cube that Cam was referencing, that it's inflating away. So you're just less discerning about where do I put this money? Do I put it in the S&P? Do I put it in this like Lamborghini? I know a few people in here, at least one that has one of those. And so or do I put in that real estate? And so then they're just less discerning about the venture capitalists that you give the money to. And then the venture capitalist is denominating everything in dollars. Their goal generally is to raise larger funds, take management fees. And so they're looking and to mark up their portfolio companies. So they're naturally always telling the person the second they give the dollar to them is like, run as fast as you can. They're like, where? It's like, I don't know, just keep running and keep growing. And so the first thing you say is go hire a bunch of people. And so when you hire, everyone knows that's one of the two hardest things in life are, well, maybe three: building a business, allocating capital to businesses, and hiring people. In any order they're probably like order of operations, but it's hard to hire. So if you just have to get told to go hire a bunch of people, you're literally just cutting your burn, and if not by 50% to 75%, because most people, we've all worked in places and hired you at best can bat 50%. And so the approach we took at Early Riders is we denominate everything in Bitcoin. And so this ties back to the ultimate allocator being the entrepreneur. If you're allocating to somebody that looks at the world through this lens of the price is appreciating Bitcoin at X year over year, well, you want them to spend the money. You just want them to spend it with the highest level of discernment and scrutiny, because they have to have other, expertise is founder market fit, all the things you would naturally hear in the common tropes. But it's this notion that Cam alluded to, is that it gets harder and harder year over year to invest in companies or build if you're losing X purchasing power, because you're effectively trying to build with one hand behind your back, now two hands, and next thing you know, you're just like stuck in mud. And this is where businesses and the deflation comes into, because the harder and harder it gets to build a business, means that unit economic margins are decreasing because you have to raise prices, which means that you have less users, which lowers the likelihood to be successful. And so we've kind of taken on the very far fringes of, we're still early to explaining why Bitcoin has value, but on the very bleeding edges of that, we're investing in companies, and they're across the spectrum. We have a gentleman here, I won't call him out publicly, but he ran a successful software company, was venture backed, and then realized that Bitcoin was the thing, and he basically was able to allocate to Bitcoin in, I want to say 21, has experienced significant appreciation and had to re-underwrite everything he does because majority of the market's on a rat race, just like humans are on a rat race. Like if you talk to anybody that gets to this point of speaking about Bitcoin, they'll all come down to, or majority will say 2020 was the biggest time for them to recognize this, because this isn't really an IQ test, it's a common sense test. It's like, do I want something that can be infinite, or do I want the thing that only has 21 million? The problem is the only way you get to that is with a certain amount of time off the rat race. And during 2020, we all know how much time we had to think and look into these things. And so that's ultimately where this asymmetry goes. Like the more time people have to hear about these pods and get to meet with us is where you end up.
What Michael's doing with early riders is insane. Like it's totally insane. So insane. Like Brickyard, for our next fund, we're going to allocate 10% of the fund to Bitcoin because I will not raise another fund and not have an allocation to Bitcoin.
Burning the boats still in a lot. Are you going to sign up for that, or is this the first they're going to hear about?
I think
Breaking
it will not be a top decile fund if you don't in this next decade. But like what he's doing is absolutely insane. What he is promising his LPs is, I'm going to return you more Bitcoin than you gave me. His hurdle rate is a 60% CAGR asset. Like, let me just go back to a 50th percentile venture capital firm returns a goose egg. Half of venture firms do not return capital, any capital. All right, you have to get to the 70th percentile to like 1x, right? I mean, these numbers are just insane. And so my take is, I'm going to take 10% of our next fund and I'm going to allocate it to Bitcoin. And that one allocation, even if it grows at a 20% CAGR over the next 10 years, I'm a top decile fund on that allocation alone. And so I'm starting at like a 3x fund when everybody else is starting at a 0x fund. Because LPs live in like a nominal multiple mindset. Like we're all in this world of like, what was your fund? What was your last fund's return? Right? Oh, we're a 5x fund. All right. Well, let me tell you something. This decade, there will be a ton of venture firms that are 5x funds that return less purchasing power to LPs than they took from them 10 years ago. Yeah. Like, think about that. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah. I think what Cam referenced about the returning, like the reality is, this isn't really a debate, even though it's sound like one. Is the 50% that don't return capital, like more than 50% of venture capital firms should not exist. It's a function of the amount of capital that's been infused into the system. You cannot allocate capital effectively if you've never built anything. It's just impossible. I like to go back 100 years. If you went to Henry Ford, who was, ran things in the most efficient way, if you told him or anybody that's ever run something extremely successful, you're going to give this money to an academic or somebody that went to school and learned about finance, has never built anything, never hired anybody, but you're going to give him the money, he would laugh you out of the room. But that's what we do today. So that's why there's 50% return.
I mean, that's part of it. I would also say venture capital operates on a power law, which means 95% of your returns are going to come from 5% of your investments.
Well, that's where we kind of defer on. So when there's a conflation on, we have to outcompete 60%, the CAGR or whatever the reference rate. I think the term venture capital is kind of like a misnomer in the sense of the power law. And again, that's like in my mind a fallacy in itself, that 9 out of 10 businesses go to zero. It's a product of like bad money, because why would anybody allocate to anything where 90% go to zero? So when we do this, while it seems insane, just like everything that anybody's done, anything that's against consensus looks completely rational, look insane not to do it. And the way we came to this conclusion was not looking at CAGRs and all this like versions of what Bitcoin does. Was when we built the business, we weren't insanely early, but we were early enough, A, to hold enough Bitcoin to take a chance, and B, watch everybody light money on fire. So without naming names, in the existing Bitcoin space, I'll reference the traditional venture space that everybody knows, and WeWork was that example. I saw liquidity drown out all unit economics. I saw all soundness in businesses. If anybody in a room today started a business tomorrow with us, and you give us $1 million or $100 million, I can guarantee you on a long enough time horizon, we'll build a much better business with less money. That's just the nature of humans. And so when we built the business, we realized, because we just were like, we're not taking money. Because again, the definition of having something, you don't give it away. So that's like the first thing. Like maybe the initial tranche, you need a little capital to get out of bed. But you hear about OpenAI and these companies raising all this money. It's like, well, who would do that? If you could make a bunch of money, why would you keep giving 10% year over year? So we thought we were onto something. We still think we're onto something. But the other part of that was, well, so, you know, why would you give it away if you're going to make more money in the future? There's a longer story about Grayscale and just seeing a company that printed about 10,000 Bitcoins a year, and they have product market fit. And we're like, well, if we can get anywhere near that, any equity we give up today means we're giving up Bitcoin in the future. Well, if we value Bitcoin, why would we do that? We would spend the Bitcoin today. That's how you get to the level of spending the asset that's finite and scarce. But it wasn't looking at it for we got to grow at X, or maybe you can underwrite it that way. It was just looking at it of, let's call it 10 Bitcoin to start the business. I'm going to make more than 10 Bitcoin back from the business. And the downside is going to protect of being a cash flow, nice, positive business, something to raise a family, hire some people, run a good, be a contributing member of society. And the upside, well, the upside's as big as you can dream. And that's how businesses should be run. Nobody goes into business 9 out of 10 times thinking about their lose. So that's the whole notion about venture capital. Like, this whole thing gets re-underwritten because the way we understand venture capital is absolutely like not true. It's like nobody in the right mind would go into a bet 9 out of 10. It's something we've sold to people. And when you re-underwrite that the money is scarce and you want to return it, now when you get out of bed to allocate your time and capital, it's to return the base level of the money back to yourself or your investors. And then the upside is just making more Bitcoin than you do and paying out the dividends. And you're now not always going for an exit. So we like to underwrite from returning the Bitcoin plus some to investors, and then you get, and so that's via dividends, and then you get the upside if somebody exits, right? If somebody goes for it and they turn into Michael Jordan, then you get your return times 10x or whatever, or 100, whatever the number is. So it's just a different way to look at this whole space.
It's a similar idea to what Cam was saying earlier around, you know, the venture firm today that decides to put 10% in Bitcoin is going to be a top to sell perform over the next decade, call it. The same idea is true of company XYZ that decides to hold X amount of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. The frame of reference that you're mentioning around, well, 9 out of 10 bets go to zero, that number 9 going to zero is actually decreased over time if they're, you know, storing value in a better form of money, right? So that's part of the thesis as well, is like we are actually de-risking the business venture by having them, you know, hold some amount of their value and increasingly have their cash flows flow into a better form of money that is more resilient and will grow their purchasing power over time. So it actually de-risks the number that will go to zero. So we think that, you know, in our fund, it'll be less than 9 out of 10 are going to zero.
Let's see what you guys are doing. Like what we do at Brickyard is we're like kind of guaranteeing that none of our teams are treating this like a project, right? What you guys are guaranteeing is that every one of your entrepreneurs that you back is allocating capital with Bitcoin as the hurdle.
Right.
Right. And like, how many founders have you had over the years? I mean, obviously, coming from WeWork, I mean, it just comes back to human nature. If you didn't earn the money, it takes a really special person to allocate that capital as if it's their own, right? And like every venture-backed founder, you know, they're taking other people's money. And they are, you know, in most cases, the venture firms are actually like pushing them to spend it faster than they would normally, because the general partnerships incentives are, they want markups, right?
Yeah, and there's an apples to oranges thing. Like it's in the sense of, Cam said I was insane, like, or what Jared's insane. He's kind of right in the sense of like from the sentiment and status quo. And so what Cam's doing is very innovative and will be very successful in the sense of if you're underwriting and you're able to underwrite knowing what Bitcoin's CAGR is, then you can adopt that. The way we ended up on the other side is we're building a private Bitcoin bank. And so the people we work with generally grok A, Bitcoin's appreciation, and B, they don't want dollars.
I think y'all are going to be more successful than us. Like Shane and where's Shane? Shane and I were talking away over here. Like, your model is the model.
Yeah, we're just on the other side of it, and there's like everyone, to your point, because we've talked to a lot of traditional venture capitalists. Like, I'll send institutions or other individuals with looking for exposure, like to individuals like Cam and others, because I definitely recognize that like what we're talking about here is meant for somebody that like deeply understands Bitcoin and now understands that they want exposure to companies that are going to make more Bitcoin, and that's how they underwrite. But that's this tiniest small, like it's whatever the smallest percentage of people that grok Bitcoin, it's 1/100th of that want exposure to that. So that's to Cam's point, like it's just a different persona.
I was just saying, like you guys are playing on hard mode with the right model. Like if I go to our LPs and I say, hey, we're going to denominate in Bitcoin, all our companies are going to carry Bitcoin, all our companies are going to make all their capital allocation decisions against Bitcoin as a hurdle, they're going to be like,
give me my money back.
Yeah, they would. And like this really, Bitcoin is like this ego test in that if I really told my LPs what I felt, what do you think I would tell them?
You're speaking on right now.
They might see this.
And that's fine. And then if they have their face, but the fact is they won't do this, okay? But what they should do is they should take the entire allocation and they should put it in Bitcoin.
This might, you were talking about Henry Ford, which by the way, like at that time, there were probably a bunch of people who thought he was like a Looney Tune. Like anybody selling wooden axles or horses was probably like, that guy does not have it all together. What's he doing? But you look crazy when you're early, right? Like, isn't that like, but there's like some kind of phrase about that. Like when you're first to it, you look a little, you're only crazy until everybody kind of catches on. But what it might do, you made the comment earlier, like, do you spend $100K on like a brain in the room or just buy more Bitcoin? With that sensibility, it might make purpose-driven investments matter more because it's not just about the return that you're going to get. Now, businesses that have a purpose or a value or something else that they're adding to society that's not just your return becomes more important. Like, what's the mission behind whatever company it is, or what are we getting out of this? Otherwise, there aren't none of those companies, and it's just buy more Bitcoin and sit back and wait, right? Like it maybe democratizes a little bit the purpose behind some of these businesses that you're able to invest in.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, it would be a speculative thing if I were saying this and Bitcoin had like a 4-year history. Bitcoin has a 15-year history of growing at the rate. It's the best performing asset in the last 1 year, in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years, in the last 15 years. It's the best performing asset, right? And so, yeah, I think all of us, you just reach this point where you just want to shake people. And it's like, what are you missing here, right? This is not, this is simple, but
maybe that's a good place to wrap. I know I'm cognizant of time and want to save some time for some question and answer. So thank you guys for participating. And Jasmine, I don't know, any questions from the audience?
Let's open it up. We have time for maybe 2 to 3 questions. So
could be on anything discussed, from monetary policy to Bitcoin to fiber.
Just shout at it and we'll repeat it.
What is Bitcoin?
What is Bitcoin? Michael, you want to take that?
I mean, it's the best form of money humanity's ever seen. Gold was that for thousands of years, and Bitcoin's just gold perfected.
Can you give me a better descriptive of what it is? So like you guys talked about value. And as a real estate investor, you all love this country music venue that we have here in Nashville. We've all heard the song Buy Dirt. They're not making any more dirt. And that's where I can see the similarity with 20 million.
Yep.
They're not making any more Bitcoin.
but I know what the dirt is.
Yep.
I know what the dirt is, but I don't know what the Bitcoin is. Do I own Bitcoin? Yeah. But I don't know what it is. And I don't know how to use it. And yeah, if my Bitcoin goes up, how can I take the Bitcoin to buy eggs? And am I going to have less Bitcoin because I bought the eggs? It's like stock for me. When I look at stock, I sell the stock to buy the eggs, and I don't have any more shares of stock because the stock's not going to go up. But the Bitcoin's going to go up in value, and I get that side of it. But I've also seen Bitcoin go from one realm in volatile, drop halfway, and then come back to where it is now, which is a beautiful thing. And you and I told you, I was watching all for the past 2 weeks because you told me in my drive, it's going to hit 100. And I believe it, and I still do. And I'm waiting.
And then he texted me. So the question just, I don't know if it's going to go through on the pod, but the question was like, what is Bitcoin and value, being able to touch things and then other things not being able to touch. And when Jeff had texted me about 100, I didn't even give him and it was like millions next. That was it. So the reality is, and this is going to sound like, it's going to sound like it's not true or whatever. I can't remember what I'm trying to say, but value is objective. It's not, or value is subjective. Money is the things that give money properties. The properties that make a good form of money are objective. They're indisputable. So value is subjective. We can all have our own preference. But what makes a good form of money and why gold is money for thousands of years, that is objective. It has certain properties. Scarcity is one of them, right? We all know, again, it goes back to the guitar. If there was one that was hand signed by somebody, that's going to be more valuable than the others. But that's not enough. It also needs to be divisible because you got to be able to break it down if you're going to be able to transfer for whether it's the water or the eggs that you want, or you want to, net settle escrow for a large real estate or anything, an oil tank for billions of dollars. So it needs to be able to be divisible. Because again, house is a great example where if you have a big house, you can cut it in half, but the value isn't there. You can cut a Bitcoin in half and it's still 50% of a Bitcoin. It doesn't diminish the value. It needs to be able to be transferred over time and space. Gold failed at this because gold ultimately had a centralization problem because it's physical and you need lots of ARM cards. This is where Bitcoin shines because you can transfer it wherever. So these are the things that make a good form of money. This is how we ended up, because money is just a technology, and technologies we all know upgrade. And so gold was that for a long time. Gold had this issue of centralization because of the physical nature. So you had to have more. You put claims on it. Think about the dollar as like a next level, and then Amex is another, because they don't net settle when you spend your Amex card, right? They net settle on a nightly or monthly, whatever it is, from banks and interchange. So point being is, Bitcoin just has objective properties that make it a better form of money. And that's what people wake up every day and allocate more capital to it. Now, to your point, all it is a ledger. Like all banks are ledgers. All the cave is that you store the gold is a ledger. And you have guards that are hoping to protect that ledger, which is your gold, or the bank that's protecting your balance. And most ledgers, if something happens, your account gets hacked, you just reverse the ledger because it's not a digital finite asset. That's why Bitcoin has this hard property to understand, because if you lose all the Bitcoin, that's what our business focuses on, is custody of it. And we've been building for about half a decade now in this space. We deeply understand it and how to secure it, because that's the only real way. We build products for ourselves because we have all our money in it. And you can only put all your money in it if you understand from a first principle way how it'll be there tomorrow, and it won't end up in North Korean hackers' hands, or it won't also end up in a landfill. So that's all it is. It's just money. And all money is just a ledger on who owns what. And again, just to go a little deeper, is gold was a bearer asset. So who had gold? Had the gold. In Bitcoin, it's addresses, like a physical, like an email address, and whoever has the password to your email can read all your emails. In the same way, whoever has the password to move the Bitcoin from that address has the Bitcoin. Well, historically, people, the only way to keep it safe is they have to keep it in their homes on these little plastic devices. But that obviously becomes a problem when people break into your house and all the things associated, or you lose it. Because historically in Bitcoin, you can't leave it on what would be like a custodial relationship, like a Coinbase. Because for every Coinbase, there's like 10 other places that have lost all the Bitcoin. This is what causes the crashes. So it goes back to 21 in the asymmetries, is that people conflate what happens with the volatility to Bitcoin. It's just the world pricing in a net new asset. Again, going back to history, if you thought about gold. So gold, if anybody's had experience with a troy ounce or a bar, when you picked up that bar, that gold, it's beautiful, it's nice, it's refined. Everybody knows a Kruger and golden eagle. I think that's what it's called in the United States. But when it came about, it looked like that. It was like a nasty rock with a bunch of dirt, and somebody was giving you something else that didn't have that objective value. And over time, we're coalescing as humans on like, what is objective value? What can I shave off? What like can go to the bottom of the ocean, or somebody passed away and I can pick up 150 years and it's still exactly that. Like that's what gold does. That's what Bitcoin does. And so when you go through that, the world's just repricing. Like, what is this asset? To Cam's point, like, how does this store my value? How do like somebody will give me more cows for this thing? And then people were trading the whatever the rock was or platinum or whatever. And think about this analogy. It's very similar with crypto. So this is also a big conflation with the space is people will hear digital assets or crypto and they assume Bitcoin. They're the most fundamental different thing. It's the same way as describing aluminum and gold. You would never trade any of your gold for aluminum. And that's the same thing that people try to talk about here. And one can be speculative and you can make some money. And if we want to be diplomatic, think of it as like a venture bet where 9 out of 10 go to zero. But Bitcoin is just a completely different asset. And now the rest of the mainstream is waking up to that. So Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, we just had Microsoft, one of the largest companies in the world, just had a pitch, putting on their corporate treasury. It's just a different asset now, or it's a different asset to be treated. But while it's happening, the monetization, we've never in our lives had an asset monetized in real time. So we don't understand it. We're just like looking around, seeing this thing, and it's going up and down. Well, that makes complete sense because there's $450 trillion of total value in the whole world. And this asset is just barely at 100K, $2 trillion. So of course it's going to go every time somebody had a conversation with somebody market buys, the UAE put it on their, balance sheet for their sovereign nation. Like all these things will move that price. And then somebody else will lose the asset. Somebody else will have a Ponzi and it'll crash and it'll look like it's doing the same thing. But the noticing point why you're interested is it always finds a higher high.
So I would add to that, and I would just say real estate should be priced for its utility value.
However, real estate's value is based on what someone's ready and willing to pay.
Sure.
But it's like the same thing with Bitcoin. If they're ready to pay.
But today you have people that are buying real estate as a store of value and not as a utility of I need a roof over my head, or I need a place to put a restaurant, or I need right? Like real estate should be priced with its utility value in mind. But because we've broken the money, because our money loses 7% a year, people are not holding cash. Like my parents, when I was in high school, we had like savings accounts, right? We like held cash in a savings. No one holds cash anymore. Does anybody have any money in a savings account?
Unless you're a venture capitalist.
Yeah, well, we have a money market, but I'm talking about when my first job out of college, I was one step above a teller at a bank in a mall parking lot in Birmingham, and we sold savings accounts at 0.5% interest. Okay. And a lot of people had that. Today, none. That's probably not even so you have people that you're not holding your value in cash anymore. And so that's why we have such a huge rise in asset prices in housing. People they're not pricing housing for its utility value. They're pricing it for its utility value plus for its it's a better store value than cash, right? And so, what Bitcoin does is it's a money that doesn't lose value, and so you no longer have to.
Right. The irony is that we're buying it with our money, U.S. dollars, which is fine. It's just like I'd be buying gold, like you talked about. And my question isn't to discredit what you're saying. My question is for everybody to hear what I want to hear.
Sure.
You guys. So I appreciate your answer.
Yeah.
For the on-ramp guys, you mentioned your businesses are charging more Bitcoin, and just curious if you could elaborate on your model and what your focus is.
So there's two businesses. There's Onramp, which is, think about like a private Bitcoin bank for individuals all the way to institutions. We worked with it was public about 2 weeks ago, the first UK pensions. We helped get an allocation to Bitcoin. And then what Cam was referencing in the Bitcoin denominated, it's early riders is a venture firm. So think of it as almost like the investment bank on its side. So we help, whether it's our clients or external, you don't have to be a client to be an investor. In early riders, we allocate capital in the ecosystem and across not only in just Bitcoin, but in companies that are producing cash flows that are sweeping that excess into BTC looking to outcompete competitors that are, playing on with, the hand tied behind their back.
Yeah, at a very high level, just to add to that, the whole idea in denominating the fund in Bitcoin is we get Bitcoin from our LPs. We then invest that Bitcoin into businesses. Those founders then, have the same reverence for the Bitcoin in terms of their opportunity costs and what they're going to go out and spend on. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, our goal is to return more Bitcoin back to our LPs than they gave us. And that's sort of at a very high level of the model. But the way you could sort of abstract away, what I just said and just think about it like this is, we're taking the Bitcoin, we're going out and producing value in the real world with XYZ business that we think is able to produce basically more. Whether it's okay if they're producing, dollars, as long as we're sweeping those dollars into Bitcoin over time so that we end up with more Bitcoin than we put in effectively. So that's at a very high level of the model.
And maybe just because I don't know if you got to introduce yourself, I think we're not all cowboys out here. I think, Cam and myself, Cam had a great story about being that teller. I remember listening to a podcast where he was doing it and just I don't know if he left in the middle of the job, that's how I like to remember, but he just basically left. He's like, I can't do this my whole life. And I've had those experiences. But Brian.
Yeah, but I guess before starting the Bitcoin private bank, I worked at an actual private bank, Brown Brothers Harriman, for about 9 years on the allocation side. And then after that, sort of, personally catching the Bitcoin bug in 17, 18, worked at Coinbase for a year in 2022 before joining Michael and building Onramp. So come from the traditional finance space and sort of the allocation side in general.
This will be our last question of the evening, but there will be time to ask questions individually.
I was going to say, can you talk about the mindset shift or difference that you see in the founders you get Bitcoin to versus the ones that you get dollars to? How do they operate differently?
It's funny you asked that because it's like anything. You come from your frame of references, and there was a lot of doing things the wrong way and sometimes the right way that built into what you're referencing. And it goes back to the incentives all the way down. So it was kind of tongue in cheek, but a venture capitalist takes the money in, they do capital calls, and depending on how they structure it, that money sits in a money market fund that's still losing in real terms, right? Not to put you on the spot, but it is. And so you do that, and then so your incentive is to get that money out because you want to raise more money, and you want to raise it in the next 12 and 18. You want to have a larger fund. And anybody that really looks at stuff critically knows that larger funds are harder to return capital. Smaller and tighter is always better. And so by aligning all the incentives, you get to do all of it, and you get to play the mode. So again, Cam says it's hard mode. I think of it as easy mode because going back to to allocate capital, if you look at the best investors, the best value investors in the world, they sat on their hands. They don't do much. They find the right pitch and then they swing, but they don't swing much. And when you're in traditional venture capital, you have a nail, you have a hammer, and everything needs to look like a nail. So you're looking for everyone to make it make sense versus you put the thing in Bitcoin, you do your capital call, you leverage, a good form of custody so it'll be there. Our sitting on our hands is we're building all day long. And by building, you get to spot all the gaps, all the inefficiencies in the market. You get to come, and if you have too many ideas, well, you start to figure out what do we need to see. And then to your point, where this gets really exciting is that, and because I'm a product of this, so I have lived this, but the best entrepreneurs and best founders, we all know, go to the best technology. This is just how things happen. They go to the best cities, they just lead. They're the first people by definition. They look crazy until they're not. And so I've seen this from hiring from that past half decade. The best people need to get out of the space because once they recognize, this is why I love talking to Cam, because Cam's in trouble, struggle right now. What do I do? So but it's just a reality. I just had so many of these conversations and I realized the best people hire and all the things is you find the person that's look, I can't I had a frame of reference. I had this version of the world and it's kind of changed. I have to re-underwrite it. And that person, they have to jump out of that job and they're the best people to bring on your team, like Brian. And so to your point on the founder side, it's very similar because in traditional investing, you need founder market fit, you need the grit, you need the hustle, you need all the things that you would need for somebody for the whole world to tell them you're insane, still say no, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to do it. But the last part is you de-risk that by saying, oh, and I'm going to hold the best form of money And to like Emily's point earlier, it's not that you don't spend it. It's just that you're thinking more critically about how you spend it. Because we've all been in the position where you have too many dollars and you're just like moving around. Versus if you have this asset, you know it's going to appreciate, you're just going to be thinking more critically. So you layer all those things on top, and now you're really cooking with like jet fuel because you're working with the best founder that's thinking in the clearest way. Because once you see what Cam's described with the money, you start to look at the world in a completely new lens, and you're just basically running in a cheat mode at that point because everyone else is like running into this building that, you know, is on fire, and you're just like running out with the crew and being like, we're going to go build another building. No. And this is what's happening at companies, because companies are by definition, like especially large ones, they have the bureaucracy, they have a lot of the things that like ties everything behind their back. And to Dan's point on the AI side, they're not able to have like a certain level of fat. Every company has a certain amount of fat, because if you have money that's not sound, then you naturally are always going to spend it in an unsound way, and it's just at what level. And so then those entrepreneurs are seeing that grok, what we're talking about here, and they say, oh, I'm going to leave, because they first try to go like help. Again, this is from experience. They first try to go help, and they try to say, we need to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. We need to like get more efficient. We need to start sweeping. But the reality is it's too hard to like, this is why in Bitcoin being very emergent, individuals adopt it first and institutions are slowly coming, because these concepts are really hard, but individuals can get them pretty simply if they like take the time. But imagine from a board level to driving consensus, it becomes nearly impossible. So those individuals at the same level trying to get their company to adopt any of this, whether they know it or not, I like to call it the carrot or stick. They're going to lead by the carrot because they're going to realize I can have a better opportunity to go out and compete by leveraging all these deflationary tools. Or the stick is by their unfortunate circumstance of having to try to spend 2 years to convince them, and then wake up one day and realize this was all a fool's errand. I should just go out and now compete them because I know how to leverage the tools and I have a better form of money. And so while they're having to compete with inflation, I have a better form of money. I don't have to raise my prices, which lets them out compete them. So hopefully that helps.
Emily, do you have a final thought for this evening as a Google Fiber?
What is my final thought? Well, thank you guys for having this conversation, inviting me to be a part of it. I do own some Bitcoin, by the way. I'm not a complete noob. I think these conversations that we talked about at the beginning, Google Fiber just launched what we call our lifestyle products. We had 1 gig for the last 10 years. Now we've got 8. And I'm having conversations like I did 10 years ago, going to the creators, the dreamers, the doers, and saying, like, what are you going to do with 8? It's not just Bitcoin. It's not just entrepreneurs. It's really anybody that's in that mindset is, I think, who we're after. And I think the take-home message I hope about Google Fiber is you are the why and the what in your business. Anybody watching this has their own why and their what, and Google Fiber just wants to be the how all of that happens. So we can be the stage. Everyone else can kind of perform on top of it, whether this is in Nashville or any other city that we're in. We just want to be able to provide and be the how that stuff gets done.
Very well said. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the show. If you found the information valuable, please share the episode with a friend or leave a rating on your favorite podcast app. All the links we discussed in today's show will be in the show notes inside your podcast app. Before we finish, a quick reminder that Onramp Media is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment or legal advice. Regardless of where you are on your Bitcoin journey, we'd love to hear from you. Visit onrampbitcoin.com/contact to schedule a consultation with one of our private client advisors.